This conference will now be recorded.
It looks like Liz was going to start the meeting and her computer froze.
Oh, I'm good. We all need to be muted.
I'll all mute.
Hey guys, this is Liz. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yes, now I can hear you, Liz.
Guys, I'm so sorry. I'm having computer technicalities. I'm going to start this with just over my phone, and I'll hop on the computer and take it from there when my camera comes back up. All right. I hope you don't lose me there. Okay, it is now 6:03 p.m. on October 28th, 2020. This is the ARB special meeting of the Architectural Review Board on November 4th. I'm going to introduce all our members online tonight. We've got Leslie McCauley, Marion Castell, Dave Riley, Sherry Green, and I don't know now without you guys if we've got Humphrey or Allison on board yet. Do we have them yet?
I'm here, Liz. The ID didn't work for some reason the first time around, so.
Awesome. Okay. And Allison Hughes, are you on tonight?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, got it. Allison Hughes and Alex Lopatowski. Please say, you may have to correct me there, Alex.
It's Lopatinsky, but close enough.
Lopatowski, got it. And we've got another new member, Rebecca Morrison, who will be, I believe, listening in for the majority of the conversation and might join us for parts of it. All right, so starting first in the meeting tonight, we've got the signage. We've got discussion of ARB. I'm really sorry, guys. This is like a day. We've got ARB number 21 for the Corbin District. Dave, Kate, please introduce yourselves, and please, for God's sake, take it over from me. Thank you.
Great.
I'm David Genovese, principal of Baywater Properties and the developer of the Corbin District. Kate's here with me too. And Kate's going to really run this presentation because I'm too long-winded.
Okay.
This is Kate Perez, also from Baywater. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to try to share my screen now, and hopefully this works. All right.
Kate, before you intro, maybe I should just make like the general intro.
Sure.
And on kind of what the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish is. So, you know, we're thankfully we've begun construction of the project. So we're moving the drainage culvert behind or alongside 1020 and 36 Old Kings Highway South, as many of you may know. hoping to begin real construction in January by taking down the gas station and the 2 buildings behind it. Our goal is to really kind of, amplify and continue some of the things that we've been doing over time. And Kate's got some great images to kind of share a flavor for what we want to do with the project. What we're going to try to do is make it as efficient as possible to kind of work through signage with all of you, given that there'll be, up to 40 different tenants in the project. But what we also want to do is make sure that we kind of set a really high bar for signage, building signage, and also blade signage. We love blade signs. We put 2 blade signs on Warm and Pliables, working with you in the building at 1025 Post Road. Pliables opens Friday, by the way, which will be great. The kids are excited, and Warm has opened. But what we're going to try to do is really, create a lot of texture through the signage and the branding of the different stores, and create kind of a richer feeling than has existed in the past on some of these buildings. We did it with 1020 Post Road. Penny did it with Grove Street Plaza, and again, working with you also recently on the Dairy and Running Company, which we love. But we really want to kind of have great signage to give this place texture and relief, and give the tenants a tasteful way to brand themselves. The last thing I would point out is that we used as a foundation for this the signage program that Federal Realty had presented to you a while back. But the one key difference between our project and the federal project that we just want to highlight and underscore is that, we're trying to design what we call 360-degree buildings. Buildings that you're going to walk around fully from the Post Road or Corbin Drive and around. And so there isn't really a back of the house with these buildings, which is architecturally challenging and challenging from an engineering point of view, because we're hiding all of the infrastructure. We're not going to see gas lines or electric meters or garbage refuse containers and so on. So I make that point just so you kind of keep it in your mind as you kind of look through and hear from Kate about the project or proposal and how it relates to what Federal Realty proposed, where there is a lot of back of the house.
No, thank you, David. And to follow up on David's point on the comparison to federal, I know that there are very different projects in, different areas of town, different sort of flows of people and cars and everything else. So I have read through the federal program a few times in putting this together. And if it's helpful, I'm happy to make a reference point of, I think I know off the top of my head now on some of these points, what was approved on the federal program, what is in the town regulations, and what we're proposing here. So I'm happy to kind of point those things out because I think it's always helpful. Everyone knows the town regulations. Everyone went through the federal package a number of times. But, as background, I understand they're totally different projects. And we sort of came to the conclusion that, they need to be handled and looked at differently. I'll run through this presentation and Dave Keating, I'm happy to sort of walk through this, and then I understand we can do questions and comments and I'm happy to answer anything.
Kate,
yep.
You guys have got about another 15 minutes to do your presentation, and then we'll do we'll do questions. And
perfect.
And I guess if team members have questions along the way, they can make notes, and we'll address it all at the end.
Okay, sounds good. All right, hold on, this is not, there we go. So I think David mentioned this, but one of the unique parts about the Corbin development specifically is these 360-degree buildings. We have, every tenant I can say has more than one front. Many tenants have 2, a lot of tenants have 3 or even 4 facades. So the way, I know a lot of signage applications that come in, may have one storefront, may have a corner storefront, but this is a bit of a unique situation in that these buildings are all sort of similar to 1020 and that they have sort of 4 fronts, all that require signage. And, you know, two other sort of unique pieces of the project are that areas of the Corbin project are 100 or 200 feet away from the, you know, Post Road and Corbin Drive. And so, you know, we've been thinking about with those distances, sort of, do those inner tenants sort of need something different that will be visible from the public roads? And the last piece that David also mentioned is just, you know, adding a layer of texture to the building facades, and, you know, specifically with blade signs, which, you know, I know a lot of buildings around town have a lot of Baywater projects, you know, have incorporated these blade signs, and we really think it adds a layer of depth to the facades that we'd like to see those incorporated in a lot of the tenants here. This is a site plan sort of demonstrating these you know, these 360-degree buildings. I know we've been into ARB to talk in more detail on the first phase of buildings, the 3 buildings north of Corbin Drive. And just as an example, you know, the red arrows here are the entrances. So you can see that, you know, even inline tenants will have public entrances both from Corbin Drive and the parking lot, and you know, need signage on each side, you know, for wayfinding. And then, you know, as just for reference, this is the ground floor plan of the federal development, and you know, it's a different approach where they're working with existing buildings and aren't, you know, sort of working through the same 360-degree building approach. There's, you know, a clear and distinctive front of each store. So, you know, I think that's where the projects start to differ and you know, kind of have different signage needs. And this is the last point that I spoke about before of, you know, especially some of the areas closer to the I-95 easement. You know, we have some areas of building F and building D in the second phase of the development that are, you know, 200 feet from the post road. So getting into the, you know, the actual proposed signage program, we're proposing that inline tenants are allowed 2 wall signs, calculated using the same square footage metric as the town regulation, 0.33 square feet per foot of frontage. And I think what's different here is that we're asking that frontage facing plazas, parking, or driveways count towards that linear square footage. And that's sort of in line with what we were seeing on the site plan. There are building fronts that people will, you know, have a public entrance that's facing parking, and, you know, otherwise I don't believe that linear square footage would sort of count towards that calculation. The second point here is that awnings will count towards the wall signs square footage. And the last piece here, that the last point on this page that differs from the town regulation, is that an inline tenant would be allowed 2 blade signs that would not be deducted from their square footage. And the thinking behind that is to encourage people to incorporate a blade sign and, you know, again, have that sort of texture and depth and you know, element that also helps to scale the buildings and bring in kind of a pedestrian scale. So I think I have 2 examples here of an inline tenant, and the blue rectangles basically represent what this tenant would be allowed under the proposed program. So this tenant would have a Corbin Drive facing sign, a sign facing the parking lot, and would be allowed a blade sign on each facade. And this is a second inline tenant on the second phase of the project, and actually is a tenant that we're talking to about coming to the project, Barry's Boot Camp. And this is, gives you a sense of the scale of signage that they would be allowed under the proposed program, in addition to a blade sign on either side. Oops. So moving on to corner tenants, under the proposed program where, a corner tenant would be allowed 3 wall signs, again, calculated under the, the town regulated 0.33 square feet. And, the same note on awnings that those would count towards square footage. And again, 2 blade signs. And this is an example in the first phase of buildings, a corner tenant on building H, and what they would be allowed under the program. So, a sign on each of their primary facades, as well as a blade sign on each of those primary facades. This is another example of a corner tenant that actually has 3 facades. Or 3 public facades, one facing the public plaza, one facing sort of an interior private road that can also be closed and used as plaza area, in an event or a farmer's market, something sort of special on a weekend. And the third facade, also faces a private road. So, again, in working through leasing and talking to different groups about their vision for these spaces, this is really, again, a space that has 3 main facades that could potentially have 3 entrances. So we have another corner tenant at the west end of Building I, which I know we've all spoken about, the Bank of America space on the Post Road. So we have already brought this tenant through the ARB, and they were interested in 2 wall signs, one facing the Post Road, one facing Corbin Drive. Under the proposed signage program, they would be allowed the 2 wall signs that they've already been approved for. They would be allowed 1 additional sign under the program we're proposing, a blade sign actually at the corner of Post Road and Corbin Drive on the Boston Post Road facade. And this is sort of one real life example of a tenant. It's a relatively large space. It's a 4,000 square foot space. And they are happy with, the sign that they've been approved for on the Post Road, as well as the Corbin Drive sign. But they are interested in a blade sign, again, for sort of the scale and texture, but also for people driving sort of south and I guess west on the Post Road, who might not otherwise see the signage facing the Post Road, and that blade sign is just a sort of an additional visibility.
Hey, Kate.
Yep.
I'll just add one thing, because
Sure.
the great thing about this commission or board is that a lot of folks have been on this board a long time, so they've heard some of these other presentations.
Yeah.
I think like Sherry would remember, and Dave Riley too, I think was there. Dave Keating, definitely. He never forgets anything. When we went back and did the new revised signage program for Merrill Lynch, which is actually owned by Bank of America, you remember that the original signage had their name on the cupola, or in the cupola, reset from the Post Road, set back from the Post Road, and they complained that people couldn't see it unless they were, in that one sweet spot, kind of middle of the block for a split second, but nobody driving by could see it. And so we actually came to this board and asked for permission to put signage on the sides of the building facing the oncoming traffic. So the blade sign in this case would actually serve that same purpose. It'll help people see Bank of America is there from the post road as they're driving down it.
That's a good point. And, I think just to sort of, well, you know what, I'll run through anchor tenants, and then I do want to just touch on inline, corner, and anchor tenants, and what is in the town regulation, what is in the federal approved proposal, and what we're proposing here, just to kind of give you those two reference points. For anchor tenants, we're proposing four wall signs total. An awning sign could be in lieu of that and would count towards square footage. And again, 2 perpendicular or parallel blade signs. And an anchor tenant, qualifies as a tenant of 10,000 square feet and at least 3 facades. And we really only have 2 areas in the project, in the second phase of the project, that would qualify as anchor tenants. Building F, which is sort of the inner building, off of the Post Road and Corbin Drive, and then the building at the corner of the Post Road and the I-95 off-ramp, Building D. So this is the example of Building D, of sort of the square footage that they would be allowed under the proposed program. And actually, I did not do Building F as an example. And, just to be candid, we don't think of this signage program as something that is going to cover every scenario. There are a lot of retailers in the project. There are, 14 in the first phase, and I think 24 in the second phase. So the goal of the program is to address a lot of the typical conditions. But in the case of Building F, I'm sure that we will ultimately, have a tenant that has special requests for a space that large, in which case we would be coming back to the ARB to discuss, that particular tenant. So, I didn't sort of guess at how that, what sort of signage that tenant would want. And, just to recap on the number of signs and sort of what's being requested here, under the town regulations for inline tenants, corner tenants, or anchor tenants, we would be allowed 1 sign, plus either a secondary wall sign or a blade sign. So a total of 2 signs for each tenant. Under the approved federal regulation, inline tenants are allowed 2 signs, corner tenants are allowed 3 signs, and anchor tenants are allowed 4 signs. So we're pretty much in line with the proposed federal quantity of signs. And the blade signs, again, just to be candid, are different than the federal program, in that we're asking that that a tenant be allowed a blade sign outside of that. Artwork, any artwork that's visible from a public road, we would bring back to the commission. And I know we've worked together on the Love Abundantly sign, which we love, and feel like it really brightens up that space and has been a great addition to that building. And I think this is going to be an evolving conversation with the public plazas and the great outdoor spaces that we're trying to create. So as we get into artwork, we will absolutely share that, and hope to work with you on that. Sort of, yeah.
5-minute mark for you to wrap up.
Okay.
You're doing a great job. Just keep it
Okay.
up.
Yeah, no, I got you. I think I'm pretty much on track. So these are the next few pages. I apologize, I sent these out a bit late yesterday, but I added a few pages to address some details, because I know that there's we want to be thoughtful about materials quality and the design quality of these signs, and make sure that we're upholding the standard of the great examples of signage that are in town already. And so just to drill down into a couple of these details, so that to give you a sense of what we will be coming back for as well, I think any monument sign or directory sign we would come back to ARB for. That's not something we would, install or, make a guess at. Banner signs, anything on a public facing road would be something that we would come back to ARB for. Banner signs on non-public facing roads, we would like the ability to, for example, install banner signs on the light posts surrounding the public plaza if there's a special event or something seasonal. And so, we're trying to think of, how that public plaza programming works. And then
Kate, I'll interrupt one sec because like everybody knows this example, but let's say that, we want to do a concert series on Friday nights in the middle of the plaza. We might change it up each week and, put the name of the band up and say Darien Summer Nights, the Spadtastics, this Friday night. And so, that could happen on a weekly basis, but it would be just, tasteful and nicely done. We just wouldn't want to have to come back for each of those if it's in the interior of the project.
And then on window signs, this is just pointing back to the town regulations of not to exceed 10% of the glass surface. On illumination, what's proposed here is that signs will be lit with continuous white light and follow the signage regulation 36.E. And for internally illuminated signs we would be able to allow tenants to halo light signs with rear facing light only, and any channel lit or front lit signs would be brought to, or neon signs would be brought to ARB for individual approval. We envision light fixtures, like pin lights, gooseneck lamps, or traditional lanterns. And to give you a sense of what's on the base building, non-tenant work, we're incorporating almost entirely gas lanterns, like bevel fixtures, like what's on 1020 today. And so we really want to kind of continue that language and that sort of, intimate scale and lighting that's, that's on 1020. And, that kind of gives you a sense of, and, we're going to be working closely with tenants to make sure that anything installed is not, conflicting with that quality and that look. Content will be business name and logo, street address. And then, I have a few notes here on quality and materials of, what we're envisioning and sort of the level of quality and level of design that we will expect from tenants. And this slide just sort of speaks to, Bindfield's design of, it's sort of a modern take on the colonial New England town. And we want this to look like it was built up over time. And, we hesitate a little bit to limit the amount of, the sign materials to one or two materials, say just wood with just metal brackets or things like that, because, I think allowing tenants to bring creative ideas is going to be ultimately beneficial and will create the best aesthetic. But, I think it's important that, and I included this note about landlord having discretion to review, approve, reject, request that tenants change things, because, ultimately we really want this whole project to sing together, but also work well with all of the surrounding downtown. So, I think the intent is to hold each tenant to a high design standard in terms of what their signage is. And this is, the last slide is just sort of a general statement of, if there's something that's not covered here, it will be brought back to the ARB for review. I think it's not intended to be something where if it's not mentioned, it's considered okay. So, you know, we know the town signage regulations well, and, you know, we didn't sort of want to rewrite the entire thing for the purposes of this. We've sort of wanted to address the specific points that, unique about this project. And these last couple pages are just some inspiration pages, you know, around Darien and also in other projects that, you know, that we've found is successful and, you know, have a great sense of place. So, you know, there's a few images in, you know, in Westport, in a development in Palisades Village in Los Angeles, and Hingham, Massachusetts, and Newport. And, you know, I think we want to keep an eye on these examples that, you know, can be great inspiration as well. And that's all I got. I hope I'm on time.
Right. Luckily, we're sorry, Liz Geiger here, Chairman. I should have reminded you guys all to state your name before we speak. That's great. You know, we're kind of all familiar about this going through with Federal Realty, but like as Kate and I kind of actually talked about this offline before we talked, is Federal Realty kind of hit us with so much information that it's almost hard to process. So by the end, we were so beaten up. We didn't really we got a couple of things in there, a couple of feedback, and by the end, we're like, all right, let's just pass it. So Kate and David really did a smart job by kind of saying like what, you know, how this is similar to Federal Realty, where they've taken, you know, where they've gone beyond that, and where we're meeting our own guidelines that we've set, we worked hard to set. So that's great, Kate. I really appreciate it. You guys did a great job. I'm gonna call on you guys one at a time and let you guys do your feedback first. The order will start with Leslie, then Sherry, then Dave Riley. So you kind of queued up on who's going. Leslie, you ready to lead us off?
Sure, Leslie McCauley. Great presentation, fabulous. I just had one reservation about the anchor sign, or the Bank of America having the one more sign on the corner. It just feels like a lot of signage. That's it.
Liz Geiger here. What do you mean, Leslie, can I ask, what do you mean too many signs, or the size of signs? Or Kate, you can jump in, or if you're busy taking notes, but can you clarify?
Yeah, I think that with the signs that are there already, that to have the blade sign is redundant. I feel like you'd be able to see, I still have the plan from the last packet. You'd be able to see coming from either direction in the car. I feel like that it's Bank of America.
If you're coming down the post road from Norwalk, say,
Yep.
you wouldn't, you might not see that sign, the street or the building sign, in the way that the blade sign will be visible, because it'll be perpendicular to your path of travel. So that's why I mean, Kate, correct me if I'm wrong, but they actually want 2 blade signs, I think.
They do. We said
We're side of
only
we've
one
been
blade.
kind of negotiating with them to kind of limit it. But having had the experience that they had with us with Bank of America, with Merrill Lynch, excuse me, and having concerns about visibility as you're kind of passing by, you know, we've been able to, I think, convince them that 1 will be sufficient, 2 would not be approved. But they're pretty adamant in this case about that blade sign. And we thought it was, it's definitely, we've lived this with Merrill, so we actually understand their point of view on that and agree with it.
Even more so than sorry, I don't know what the labels are on this diagram that you sent out.
So that
seems like it warrants a blade sign, but Bank of America to me doesn't seem like it warrants one.
Guys, please make sure you say your names before each time you speak. Thank you.
This is Kate Perez from Baywater. The other thing that I think Bank of America is trying to sort of target is like the pedestrian friendly approach. So you know, a car coming down the post road is actually a little bit further away, and it might be a little bit more visible for the post road facing sign. For someone walking from Bodega to, you know, in the direction of Bank of America, because of the blade sign and because the wall sign is sort of on your left and flush with the face of the building, there isn't anything that sort of indicates to people coming from, you know, on the sidewalk from that direction that that's where it is. So, you know, that's the other thing, is just sort of being closer to the building. I think it's a little bit harder to see that post road sign.
And is it, what do they want to make this food sign from? It looks really commercial.
It is, it's a metal, it's a painted metal. It was originally proposed as illuminated, which we communicated would not be approved. And, you know, I think this is sort of their standard blade sign of, you know, their corporate standards at the moment. But, you know, we can absolutely talk to them about, you know, the colors or materials if you think there's something that, you know, that's not aesthetically pleasing about, you know, the materials or signage.
B of A is especially stressful because Kate's not telling you this, but I will. She's on calls with like 30 people at a time who basically negotiate, you know, signage, materials, security, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, we've kind of pre-negotiated a lot of the stuff that they wanted away because we just knew, I mean, correct us if we're wrong. It'd actually be helpful for you to kind of share a view on this, but, you know, the internally illuminated sign, you know, we talked about the frosted glass on the windows last time we were before you on this topic. And, you know, they really truly do want 2 blade signs, which we can appreciate given that the building, their space will actually also abut the municipal parking lot. So they kind of want people from the back, from the Center Street parking lot, to be able to see where Bank of America is from that parking lot, which makes sense to us too. And candidly, we'd love to be able to give them 2 blade signs, but we wanted to be, you know, judicious in our request and not ask too much of you.
Leslie McCauley, it just doesn't seem very quaint, like the other blade signs, like the Neat sign or the Dairy and Running Company sign.
Well, and again, I think though, this is a case, sorry, David Genovese here. This is a case where, you know, I know you guys do not like to hear this, but, you know, Bank of America has these brand standards that they get very dug in on, and Neat or Dairy and Running as local businesses can be a little more malleable. You know, B of A has, you know, legions of people that kind of build up these standards. And I think we could ask them to maybe soften it, but the colors, you know, they're not going to change their colors. They're not going to change their logo. I mean, we've you know, we've been down this road with them we've been working with them for a year on this whole program.
What does the rest of the board think? Leslie McCauley.
All right, Leslie, let's start with that because I'm sure other people, Liz Geiger here, have other thoughts about the anchor tenants and so on. Next up is Sherry and then Dave Riley.
Hi, Sherry Green, board member. Great presentation. It was so clear and I love all of the photos. Thank you for doing all of that. I agree with what Leslie is saying about all the signage. I understand the need for the 4 signs and the 2 hanging signs. I don't really have a problem with that. I agree the commercial quality of the signs is kind of gives me pause, but I also understand what you're up against with their corporate logos. I'll let the rest of the board get back to that. I had one question that was kind of a red flag in my face when we mentioned it, and that was neon lights. Is there ever a place or time that we would allow neon lights?
So the way I have it worded here is that any neon lights would come back to you for individual approval. I'm just flipping through the town signage regulations. I know it mentions neon lights, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they are allowed at all. Sorry, I'm just flipping through.
Sherry, Green,
yes.
jump in here. You had mentioned it, and
Yep.
I know we've discussed this many times in the past. I didn't know whether you had a specific tenant that was requesting.
No, we
neon
actually haven't.
sign.
Yeah, we haven't had anyone specific request neon. It's in the town signage regulations as something that obviously needs to be presented to ARB, but it's not specifically not allowed. It's not like a prohibited type. But if anything were proposed in neon, that the way the program is proposed is that we would bring that to ARB. But we actually haven't spoken to anyone who's
Okay.
looking for a neon sign now.
If there was somebody asking.
Yeah.
This is Sherry Green again. Was there, is there a neon on Shake Shack? Is there a little bit of neon there?
No, I don't
No,
believe so.
not at all. Okay, thanks. Thank you. That's it.
This is Liz Geiger, Chairman. Hey, Kate and David Genovese, to save some time here, I'm going to have all the board members go through and make their comments. Could you guys just take some notes and then address them, then we'll go back again, so it's not just this.
Sure.
So it's not chopped up. I think it'll make it go a little quicker here. Okay, so that said, next up will be Dave Riley and then Marion.
Dave Riley, ARB board member. So I have I guess a couple of questions. With regards to the actual sizing of the letters, like we've gone through this on a few presentations as far as increasing the size of the lettering based on the viewing, and that has as much to do with like the speed of cars going by and distance. And you've presented based on some distances, some requests on the number of signs, but would there be any effect on deviating from the size of the lettering for the sign based on the distance? I guess that's one concern I would have. I think I know the answer to it. I think because of the intimacy of the overall design and the way it's more village-like, that they would be consistent in terms of limiting the size of the letters according to the current regulations. But I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that. One thing that did stand out and that kind of raised that question in my mind is the berries sign example. It just looks like all the letters on berries are all the same size and they look oversized. And for the, and again, it's an example. It's probably not exactly what it would be like when it's presented, but it just it looks a little overpowering to have the letters shown on that particular example in that particular way. Another question I have gets into the awnings and the use of the signage within the awnings. And that is, and again, just correct me if I'm wrong, that's just limited to the anchor tenants, if I believe I heard correctly. But on the other facades, there's a number of facades shown as just plain facades. Are there going to be awnings that are discretionary for the tenant? And if so, would any consideration be given to signage on the awnings if that's the case? And what guides that sort of decision making, or is that already embedded in the design? So those are, oh, and one last comment, and this is just a comment, not a question, on the Bank of America blade sign. I don't have a problem with the single blade sign, but I do agree with Leslie that its design and the way that it kind of doesn't really blend in with the kind of a hanging blade sign. This is like an attached to the building blade sign. I think if it at least had a bar attached to the building and it actually hung from the sign, from the bracket, rather than being just kind of an architectural feature that's attached to the building, would be a big improvement, notwithstanding changing the actual graphics. But I think if it at least was more of a detached feature and was more consistent with the other detached blade signs, it would probably go a long way to having it approved. I'm done.
Marion Castell talking. I agree with Dave about the blade sign, perhaps having a little flow from the house, the building for the, the Bank of America. I just want to get clarification on all the illumination listings. Is this going to be just a general situation? Anyone can choose what they want. That leaves up to the tenant to choose whatever these things would be. And is there any consideration about how one kind of illumination reflects on the building next to it? Is there some idea of having, if you're having internal illumination, you're talking about also the continuous white light under external illumination. Is that what that's not neon, but that's a strip fluorescent, correct? When they talk about a continuous white light, illumination, is that just as, like fluorescent light on a strip? What is that?
This is Kate Perez from Baywater. I'll answer that one quickly. I think continuous white light, sorry, that's a little misleading of the way I phrased it, but it was just sort of intended to mean, whether it's a pin lights above or gooseneck lamps, that the lighting would be white and would be as continuous as possible across the signage. So it isn't intended to be like a fluorescent strip pointed back or anything like that.
So this lighting is really referring to signage only, or is it also referring to how you're lighting the building?
This is Liz Geiger. Marion, I'm going to ask some general questions because I can keep going because other people might have lighting questions. So propose it to a question for Kate and she can address it in the end.
Well, that's my question. I don't know whether this is only for signs or is it for the whole building, these choices?
And depending on the answer, do you have a concern either way?
Well, I'm concerned that the lighting will not look integrated, because if you have 4 different choices and it's left to the tenants, I think you could have a very choppy look when it comes to lighting or illumination or signage. And that was my concern, of the overall look of it.
Okay.
So, I mean, you're saying they're going to leave it to each tenant will choose what kind of lighting they want, and there'll be no sort of how the whole thing will look as a feature. And there's no, that's my question.
Okay.
Unless you come to the Architecture Review Board, but you don't want to come there all the time. These options, once we approve them, they can do whatever they want with them, right?
All right, Liz Geiger here. That's a good point, Marion. Other members might have more on that. Do you have any other points?
No, I think we should look more carefully at how the whole thing will look together and not have the little piecemeals doing what they want. And then the last question I had, whatever happened with the frosted glass issue that was up last time? What kind of glass are they going to have now in the front windows of Bank of America?
That's great, Marion. Those are really good questions. I really appreciate it. Okay, next up, Dave Humphrey, and then Allison, and then Alex.
Thanks, Liz. David Humphrey here, ARB. Yeah, I had a question similar to Dave Riley's, just about lettering height. I see it with the anchor tenant, I believe, but didn't see anything specific for inline or corner. And then I had a similar comment about, since you do have a relatively finalized design here, would you be able to produce, a full elevation for the street to look at, how the sizing for an inline tenant fits with the sizing for a corner tenant? Because I think, the overall square footage and the lettering height, you'd want to make sure that those work together. You do have an opportunity to, again, look at the whole street frontage, since I think where all the pieces of this puzzle are going to fit. One comment on the anchor tenant that is in the kind of also kind of a corner tenant, whether it's appropriate specifically for that property to have the four signs, just based on the size of the property itself. It seemed a little bit small potentially to have 4 separate signs. And I had one other question, but I forget what that was going to be. So yeah, generally about lettering height, and then, you know, an opportunity to see everything fit together on one elevation.
Thanks, Dave. That's great. Okay, I got that noted. And if you want to send me you think of another question, you can chat me it on in the meantime. Next up is Allison, and then Alex.
Allison Hughes, ARB member. My question also is regarding letter height. When I saw 24-inch letter height, I thought, oh, and who is going to have that? And who is the Bank of America considered an anchor tenant or not? I'm not quite sure where those are located. Also, now, David, you made me forget my question. But oh, I know. I have a little concern about signage where there is no entrance. In other words, having every facade, even when there's no entrance to the business, they're labeled, I guess. That's it.
Alex Lopatinsky, ARB. I wanted to thank Kate and David for such a great presentation. It was really clear and walked us through what you want to do here. What I want to just point out that in the spirit of the overall concept for the development, in trying to create a collection of buildings that have kind of been cobbled together over time, I think the approach to the signage wants to sort of evoke that same feeling in the texture and designs of them. So we don't want them all to look the same, although as a landlord for your tenants, you want to create some kind of language for them to follow. So my questions in sort of relative to that is, the way I understand it, the ask here to us is really in the case of actually for all the, whether it's inline, corner, or anchor tenant, you're asking for one additional blade sign to what has previously been approved by this group. So that's question number 1. And question number 2, around lighting as it relates to the building and the signs, are you planning to, and it's similar to what others have asked already, are you planning to do an overall lighting review for the development so you can understand what the total foot candle output is going to be, both on the facade and through the retail wall, so that there's a clear picture of how much light output there could be? I think that makes an impact, not on just the types of lights you use, but on the signage that's added to it. So I'd like to know how you're going to approach that relative to your tenants. That's it for me. Thank you.
Liz Geiger here. Thanks, Alex. Way to jump in. First board meeting with great feedback. We're also going to do, I've got 1 or 2 comments, and then we're going to also talk to Rebecca Morrison, our other newest member here. If Rebecca, are you ready to hop on and do some comments here?
Sure. The only comment I had is whether, when looking at the presentation is really great, but whether the idea of that 360-degree tenant, which I think is really an awesome concept, but I don't know whether there should be different regulations for an area that is actually considered an entrance for a pedestrian versus just a straight wall. Like, obviously, if it's a corner tenant, you seem to be speaking to the 360-degree tenant, but not thinking that there's a difference between a signage that might be at an actual entrance versus a wall that has no entrance at all, and whether there should be a clear distinction about, this is what's allowed at a pedestrian entrance versus just a straight shot wall that there is no entrance to the store.
That's great. Okay. Anything else?
No, that's it.
It's great. And then Liz Geiger here. Dave Riley, you had one other comment you said to the board, but maybe you could just ask that in general about a 3D rendering capability and requesting for presentation.
Yeah, Dave Riley. Yeah, I was just when I forget who was talking about how the signs are all seen together, and just from either both the consistency aspect of the signs, but also having them work uniquely, but also work together. It should be pointed out that these plans and drawings are increasingly, and I wouldn't be surprised. I would actually be surprised if it wasn't done in 3D by the architect, that when reviewing these as they come through, whether there's an opportunity to have the architect, because they have those CAD files available, insert that signage into the existing renderings, so that in the future when we're reviewing these, we are not just looking at straight elevations, but actually seeing the streetscape. And I think that's what a lot of the questions that are coming through in terms of lighting and the signs and the 360s is, it's not just an elevation that we're looking at, it's the whole streetscape, and it's the experience of walking through it. And that's something that is really well suited to a 3D rendering. So it's not a directive, but it's just kind of a request to see if that's something that can be achieved in future presentations.
If I could just touch on that one, because I think it's a good point, and we'll kind of then go back and go through all the points. I mean, we agree. We do renderings for every tenant, in marketing to them, and then as in the case of like the Bank of America situation, we tell them and they see what the town allows, and we do renderings for them. Kate could pull up one that we did, for example, for a restaurant in Nantucket called Millie's that's been talking to us about taking a space. But the challenge, Dave, is that in reality, like we go from here to, lease by lease discussion, and oftentimes the tenants will say, as this Bank of America saying to us, listen, we need 2 building signs and we need this blade sign. We don't have all the details of all the other tenants, like, because this is getting processed sequentially, if you follow me. So now we have Bank of America, we have an outline of an agreement with Barry's Boot Camp. We're going to be we're going to be working with all of our existing tenants on new signage programs for them. But we don't have, even as far along as we are today, we haven't identified every tenant in the project. So the way we look at this presentation to you is it sort of gives us the ability to show the tenants with a little bit more detail what would be allowed, what can be allowed within the boundaries, subject to our approval, and if the town requires approval, the town's approval. But it's happening kind of 1 at a time, 2 at a time. It's not, we don't know the tenants of all the buildings. But I mean, I understand what you're trying to say, and it would be great if we knew everything at once and we could kind of put it all together at once and see how Barry's and Joyride and Sweet Green go next to each other. But we won't have that information for a while.
Dave Riley here again. Yeah, I understand that. I just think as you get to those presentations, I'm not saying you have to have them all laid out ahead of time, but these are presentations that will be had in the future, is when you do have that information to at least provide an image. It's easy enough to take a 3D rendering and even just draw over it for that specific tenant. As you go further along, that information starts to flesh out. And again, it's something that I think it's just, the technology is getting to where we can start viewing it in this way a little bit more. So
no, I agree.
Just when it's capable of being done.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's one thing I would just point out. Like, it's becoming much more readily available, but not all architects can do it. So, I just would say for other people, it may not be as easy to produce.
All right, guys, Liz Geiger here. We have a strict 15 minutes left, so probably more like 10 minutes here. So Dave and Kate, do you want to come start addressing some of the issues that we've kind of brought up? I think we'll have to continue this in a next meeting, maybe make some changes. I also wanted to comment about the size of letters. I don't really see it addressed in here specifically, and I know a lot of things says if it's not here, it's based on town guidelines. So I just want to I hope you guys can clarify that. And in general, I have to say, I am a little concerned about the amount of signage. And I know you guys have a really good eye for taste and you know what you're doing, but the stuff can get hodgepodge and it can get a lot. And you don't want too much coming at you. There's a tastefulness and, you know, a little less is more sometimes. So the idea of 4 signs for anchor tenants and how large those are going to be, that's a concern of mine, to be quite honest. So that's my piece.
Okay. I
Can
have
I-
a full list.
One, David, can I ask one thing before we jump in?
Right.
Sorry, Liz.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah,
Go
David Humphrey, this might help clear something up. So it sounds like since, David, you were just saying, obviously you don't know, you know, your future tenants, what their specific needs are. You want to provide flexibility to them to be unique and allow them to brand themselves a little bit within regulations. Does that mean we're not approving this as a sign program necessarily? You would come back to us as individual tenants finalize what they are looking for. This is more, you know, a presentation on, you know, generally what you're proposing, but you would still come back one by one.
No, I think the intent was this kind of lays out the boundaries, just given the magnitude of the tenancy here. I mean, we'd be dominating your schedule for a year if we had to come for 70 tenants. And I think that was the intent of the federal program as well. You know, if there's something that is specified as like needing town approval, we do it. And, you know, if you want us to come like on a kind of an advisory basis and come every once in a while, but just the sheer magnitude of what we're going to be dealing with and doing, I mean, I think the intent of these applications was to streamline the process so that we'd understand as long as we complied with these guidelines, we could execute the signage without coming back to the ARB.
Right, and that's fine. I wasn't 100% clear. I think I would probably support the you know, request to have something that looks at this a little bit more holistically, you know, from a streetscape perspective than just to see how these potential options might look together. Even if it's, you know, I know you have some existing renderings of this, even if we're just kind of, you know, sketching in some things on top of that, it might be helpful.
Okay, Kate, do you want to go through the list? I took notes too. So did you want to run through it? And
Sure, I'm happy to run through it. And I'll start with letter sizing because I know that came up a few times. So what we have as a note is this 24-inch maximum sign. The town guidelines restrict the height to 20 inches. The way federal handled this was to say 14-inch maximum for inline tenants, 18 inches for corner tenants, and 24 inches for anchor tenants. So, you know, the way, just in watching a handful of these, you know, applications going through on the Baywater side, a handful of applications, and just, you know, seeing a lot of applications on the ARB side, I think the majority of these tenants are going to be restricted to much smaller letters than 24 inches just by the square footage alone. You know, I think it would be very difficult to get up to 24 inches with, you know, given the square footage requirements. That said, you know, I think with this, you know, the comment of 24 inches, the mindset was more in thinking of these tenants further from the road. And I may not have sort of crafted this the right way to limit that to, you know, up to 24 inches if it's 100 feet or more away from the road. And maybe that's the right way to handle it, and to limit it to 20 inches like the town regulation closer to the road. But you know, I think that the majority of these lettering, you know, are going to be much smaller, just given the, you know, the standard 0.33 square feet of linear. But, you know, I'm
this guy here, Kate. I think for the next presentation that I think you should come in with specific letter site heights for distances from the road, because that is how we did it with Federal Realty. We decided it was a back and forth multiple times. We agreed on those heights based on those distances, and agreed that we got to 20 inches because that one building was 200 feet back from the road. So if you could come back with specifics there, I think we can circle back on letter height.
sure.
Not to cut you off. So I want to make sure you guys to be able to address everything. So we've got 7 minutes left to go here. So I'm trying to.
Okay. Yeah,
Sorry.
a lot of questions. This is Kate Perez with Baywater. So I'm running down the list. So in terms of awnings, and are those limited to anchor tenants or every tenant? You know, every tenant, how is the text sort of determined, and is that discretionary? So awnings the intention is that awnings would follow the town regulation of extending no more than 3 feet out from the facade. And if a tenant wanted to put anything, any sort of lettering, logo on the awning, it would be limited to their business name or their logo as it is sort of outlined in the town regulations. And those letter heights, logo heights would also be dictated by, you know, the town regulations. And I sort of just in each of these tried to point back to the town regulation on awnings. In terms of the Bank of America blade sign, I hear the comments on, you know, a different mounting method, you know, a hung sign on a bar, you know, and I am generally hearing sort of the aesthetic, you know, comments on the Bank of America sign, and we're happy to sort of bring that, you know, back and discuss it with them. You know, and to David's point, they do have sort of, you know, tough corporate standards on what they are able to propose. But, you know, we're happy to have the discussion with them and kind of walk through that because I realize it's a unique blade sign in terms of, you know, what we see around town. So the lighting and general lighting study, foot candles, and how is lighting done by tenant. So we do have a general foot candle study of the site that takes into account, you know, parking lot lighting, street lamps, municipal lamps. It doesn't really factor in the gas lanterns along each building facade, mostly because those don't really cast meaningful light. You know, they're not providing a lot of foot candles. So, you know, in terms of the lighting by tenant, this is something that we feel really strongly about being careful about because, you know, with these sort of carefully placed gas lanterns and, you know, there are residential entries, you know, defined between retailers as well. We want to be really careful about not overlighting and, you know, having sort of a facade that sings together. At the same time, you know, I think you know, it really needs to be looked at on a tenant by tenant basis. As David mentioned, we're working with the, you know, each retailer on, you know, the right space for them. What does it look like? You know, what is the signage and everything like that? But I think restricting tenants to a specific goose lamp or a specific pin light is going to make the project feel cohesive in a way that may not ultimately, you know, it almost sort of like tipping it towards the Truman Show world, or, you know, I think we want to be careful about the whole project reading together and hanging together too tightly and standing apart from the downtown. You know, in the downtown of Darien, each storefront has its own lighting and has, you know, unique lighting, and they might both have two adjacent storefronts might have goose lamps, but different goose lamps at different heights. And, you know, I think it's a matter of really carefully looking at the tenants side by side, but I do want to be mindful that, variety is going to help tie the new development into the existing downtown rather than setting it apart. So, you know, that's why I'm a, you know, I want to be careful about how restrictive we get.
Kate, Liz Geiger here. What about the time restrictions for lighting? I think Marion was inquiring that too. Is it 24/7 or cutting?
So this is Kate Perez. So the idea would be for tenant signage to turn off at 11 p.m., which is, you know, the town regulation lighting turn off time, and that the gas lanterns and street lamps would be on overnight as, you know, as the lights at 10:20 are today. You know, the gas lanterns are on even in the early morning when it's dark, you know, so that's kind of how we're thinking about it. The base building sort of core lighting would be on, but those are, you know, those are very low light level fixtures, those gas lanterns. And I'm just going through. So corner tenants is 4 signs too many. So looking at that specific example at the corner of Post Road and the off-ramp for I-95, in that example, you know, I purposely kind of put 2 wall signs using the square footage that would be allowed for that building, because I agree with you. I don't think that that 4 signs would be needed at that location, and I don't think a tenant would request 4 signs at that location. So there's sort of a balancing point of the square footage and how big a tenant would like their sign to be is probably going to result in them not even having 4 signs.
Okay, Kate, I'm going to stop you there. I hate to do this to you. I'm so sorry. We've got to cut this off. The meeting's got to keep going. This is Liz Geiger. I'm really sorry, guys. We'll table this. I've got your notes here. I'll write up my notes where we ended on this, and I'll send it to the group and copy you guys so we have a running dialogue, and then we can pick this back up on our next November 17th meeting. But to save time, since we are out of it, I will recap in my email these points that we are discussing and are tentative about, and go from there, okay? Dave and Kate, thank you guys so much. I apologize. David, Genevieve, do you want to say?
Much.
No, I just want to say thank you very much. And one question, and Kate may yell at me for this, but I think I'm good with trying to convince B of A to go to like a hanging sign, you know, respecting their corporate branding, trying to go with a hanging sign. So, I mean, do I have a sense of the board that if I say, I just don't want to misstep at this late stage with Bank of America, because this has become weirdly an important issue to them, in my opinion, but a very important issue. Do I have a good sense of the board that if we can tweak this and soften it, make it a little more architecturally appropriate, that 1 blade sign could be acceptable? I'm not asking for an approval. I just wanted to get a sense of the board.
Board members, speak up. You guys can go off mute. We got less than a minute here.
I'm in support of it, just because of the pedestrian scale that it adds.
Yeah.
I would support it.
Yeah, or easier if someone feels terrible about it, please yell right now, and we will at least understand that. But I think that'd be helpful, because we're trying to get the Bank of America lease signed, and this is, I think, the second to last issue that we have to deal with them, and it's been brutal. So that'd be helpful. And again, it will be subject to final approvals, but I just don't want to mislead them at the late stage.
Liz Geiger, Dave, do you have a mock-up of them? Sorry. Do you have one final mock-up of VA you could send us around so you know where?
It's in the presentation that you have tonight before you, but I think we'll try to rework it. I'd like to try to rework it to a hanging sign. I think Leslie's suggestion, and I think it was echoed by others, is a good one. To try to soften it a little bit would be a good thing.
All right, guys, at 7:15 p.m. we got to adjourn this meeting. It's Liz Geiger. I appreciate your time. Special meeting. We'll continue this on our November 17th meeting. Thanks all.